So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Rick Goggins. This is, I think, a really good stage-setting talk for our conference today. Many of you may not know Rick, but I'm sure you've seen one of his products, which is the Washington State Ergonomics Return on Investment Calculator. So Rick actually created that calculator, so he's going to talk to us today about it. He works in Washington State Department of Labor, so he's a government employee. And I will also acknowledge those of you that work in the government in the room know how hard it is to travel internationally without permission. And we asked Rick in early summer, and they kept dragging, and he generously came on his own personal time. So he's here on vacation to give us a talk. So thank you very much. So prior to working at the Department of Labor, he worked with the Hughes Space and Communications in California. I guess Washington State's not too bad, but I would have stayed in California personally. He has a master's degree in ergonomics, and he's a certified professional ergonomist. So please join in welcoming Rick.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. That's all the French I have, so no worries from now on. So honored to be here and great to see so many people interested in ergonomics and turning out. So you've got great speakers coming up, and I'm going to be really brief and kind of cruise through this. So I was going to quickly talk about how the calculator was developed, show a few examples of where it's in use, do a quick demonstration of it, and then a Q&A. And full disclosure, I'm a little bit hearing impaired, so if you have questions, I'm going to ask you to go to a microphone, so I'll have a better chance at hearing what you're asking. Okay, I had an original thought once, but it died of loneliness. So everything that I do is based on the work of others. And so some of my influences are up on the screen here. Hal Hendricks' paper, still available out there on the internet. I highly recommend looking that up. Maurice Oxenberg's book, I pulled heavily from his model for cost-benefit analysis for safety and health interventions. And that's still something you can find likely as an ebook. The calculator really got its start with a phone call from Deborah Reed, who is one of our Seattle area ergonomics consultants. And she called me up out of the blue one day and just said, hey, I see all these cost-benefit analyses that are done after an ergonomics intervention, but is there a way to do it beforehand to try to convince somebody that it would be, worth their investment to do it? And I said, well, no, there's nothing out there. You would have to go out and look at, gather up a lot of those after the fact cost-benefit analyses and look at the numbers they generated and use that to create a calculator that would estimate what you might get for various ergonomic interventions. And she said, you should do that. And I said, darn it, she's right. So I got on the internet and just started looking around and gathering up case studies. And I ended up with 250 of them because there were a lot of them out there. And so, a big acknowledgement to all the researchers, all the practitioners out there who published their results. And this was the concept behind taking those results and turning them into a really simple formula for doing that before the intervention cost-benefit estimate. So you have, on the negative side, you've got injury costs and then the indirect costs, the loss of productivity, retraining, all those sorts of things that go along with it. And you might also have a bit of an inefficient work process, right? There's some room for some improvements to productivity. And then you have your ergonomic intervention, whatever that might be, whether it's a program or an individual piece of equipment or whatever sort of process you want to put in place. And that's going to be, X% effective. And so this is where the case study information came in, trying to figure out what that X is. And if you make those changes and you're successful, you should have reduced injuries and associated costs, as well as hopefully a little bit of increased productivity. And so these are the results, or some of the results from the 250 case studies. And you can see the numbers on the whole are very positive, but at the same time, people don't tend to publish their failures. So that's not entirely surprising. Quite a wide range of benefits. So reduction in work-related musculoskeletal disorders averaged a little under 60%, but the range was 8% to 100%. So obviously, some things more successful than others. Same sort of things with lost work days, workers' compensation costs. Productivity was one of the few places where there was actually a negative result, a very slight reduction in productivity with just one intervention that was published. Overall, the productivity numbers, the averages are quite high, but a lot of these case studies were done a while ago. I think in a lot of ways, industry has wrung a lot of the productivity they can get out of workers in the meantime. So I don't expect that you all would see productivity increases, in that kind of a range. In terms of the individual interventions, when I started looking at those, I wanted to see what was the range of effectiveness of what was published. And at the lower end of the scale, we see interventions that rely on worker behavior. So team lifting, safe lifting, training, things like that, tend to show up in the research as not being very effective, and even the people who published case studies of where they did see a positive result, it was in the 10 to 20% range. So not one that we consider a preferred intervention. Ones that reduce the time of exposure, and here we're talking mostly about like job rotation, moving people out of physically demanding tasks into ones that are less demanding. Those tended to be about 20 to 40% effective at reducing musculoskeletal disorders. Oh, sorry, musculoskeletal. I always have trouble with that one. Most of the interventions showed up under the higher order of controls, we'll call it. So ones that reduce the level of exposure. So you're bringing in lighter weight objects, or raising the work up to a better level, or reducing the amount of vibration in a hand tool. Those were in the 40 to 60% effective range at reducing injuries. And then finally, the best one, the one we always shoot for, is elimination, trying to get rid of the hazard entirely. And so here we're talking about something like a piece of equipment that does the lifting for you. So the worker is still involved. It's not full automation, but the risk factor has been taken care of through mechanization. Those were in the range of 60 to 100% effective. Still, you sometimes see injuries with, say you have a floor lift that's picking up people in healthcare, but you still have to push and pull that floor lift. So it's not always 100%. So these are the values I chose to input into the calculator. I tried to be at least somewhat conservative, not pick the top of the range for effectiveness. So eliminated exposure, 70% reduction in workers' compensation claims, reducing the level of exposure at the bottom of that range, time of exposure, lower still. Relies on behavior. I think I'm planning on redoing the calculator pretty soon, updating a lot of it. I might even drop that number down from 10%. I don't think most people are going to get that kind of reduction in injuries from anything that relies on worker behavior. Productivity, I thought 20% was much too high even for like the higher increases in productivity. But I thought if you did have something and it was likely to speed up the entire process, like pick up a lot of efficiencies, you might see a 10%. Medium, reducing some wasted motion. So take the example of bending over constantly to stack boxes on a pallet sitting on the floor versus having a pallet lift that raises it to waist level. Something like that could have like a 5% improvement in productivity. And then even something that really affects just how much fatigue a worker's experiencing or how much discomfort, symptoms of injuries that might result. Thought, you might pick up a 2.5%, like a modest increase in productivity there. I think when I redo the calculator, I might drop these numbers down a little bit more based on feedback I'm getting from other folks who are seeing where productivity is these days. I wanted a really simple output for the calculator as well. The goal was really to create something that safety and health practitioners, ergonomists could just sit down and go through and not have to go out and get an economics degree to figure out, or a financial training. And payback period, very simply, is just how long does it take for the benefits of the intervention to pay back the costs, the initial cost of the investment, plus any ongoing expenses that come from that. It's a good starter economic model, something that you could bring forward to decision makers and say, this proposed intervention looks promising. Maybe we can sit down with some of the financial people, run through the numbers, figure out, the kind of the range of benefits we might see, but just something to get started on that, conversation, basically. So lots of limitations of the model. It wasn't possible to take into account the delayed effects of workers' compensation, where some things are insured, and it takes a while to see the benefits in reduced premiums when you do an intervention. So this was mainly designed for, in Washington State, there are employers who are self-insured for workers' compensation, and so they're directly paying the costs of those claims. But the indirect costs are ones that the employers themselves bear without insurance, so that's one way to take into account. The injuries in costs in the model come from Washington State workers' compensation data. We are the sole provider of workers' compensation in our state, so we have a lot of accounts and a lot of data, but workers' compensation costs are very location specific. Happy to see that Ontario has developed their own version of the model, so you don't have to worry about our numbers being different. The indirect costs are just simple ratios of the direct costs, with the idea that all claims are going to have like a basement for the indirect costs of time to investigate the injury and things like that. So that ratio, the indirect costs are going to be a little bit higher as a ratio for smaller claims than for larger claims. Getting into a little more detail than maybe is really necessary. When I really drilled down into those different categories of the interventions that were done in the case studies, didn't really have a lot of examples. So again, it's a model, but I think you have to be conservative in how you apply it. And probably the biggest thing is that the estimates are assuming that you actually do a really good job with ergonomics, right? None of those things happened in a vacuum. They all had a really good process for implementing ergonomics. These came from some of the leading organizations in doing ergonomics around the world. So take that into account. If you're going to see the similar results, you have to know what you're doing. And I think that's where the CRE-MSD implementation guidelines are going to be your best friend. So every once in a while I'll do an ego thing and just kind of search for who's using the model around the world, and happy to see it's getting picked up in quite a few places, and I just want to give a few examples. So in Spain, a group took a look at a commercial laundry. And if you've ever been in one of those, there's lots of handling of dirty linens and things like that, and awkward postures, and so a fair amount of lifting. If you have the bins you see up there, they're having to dive down into the bottom to pull things out. And so they did some virtual modeling of some improvements they could make, and you can see down on the bottom right is where they used a calculator to come up with payback periods for several different options. Simple ones from just spring-loaded platforms in the bottom of the carts to bring everything up to waist level, to bigger changes, adjustable work tables, things like that. So that was nice to see. Latvia, which I will admit, I had to look it up on the map where exactly Latvia is. There's somebody there, Dr. Kaukas, who has used the calculator in several environments. This one was a woodworking facility where they brought in some new tools and some height adjustable workstations and things. And you can see, found quite a bit of expected return over the 5-year project life. And then closer to home, local hero Steve Fisher used the calculator to take a look at, in a paramedic service, the implementation of power adjustable gurneys and power loaders that will take it up into the ambulance. And so in Washington State, we're doing quite a bit of work with firefighters and EMTs on just this kind of thing. Our EMTs work in fire departments, and so they have firefighters along with them when they need to move patients. And you see quite a few injuries. Most of our firefighters don't get hurt fighting fires. They get hurt helping lift patients. And Dr. Fisher found that the payback period would, for implementing these in the service, they would pay for themselves basically during the life of the equipment. So that makes it a good investment as well as a great way to protect the health and safety of the paramedics. Okay, so this is the model. I would say you might want to actually look at the Ontario model rather than this one. But I am going to do a very quick demonstration of it. I've set it up with the idea that you could investigate 3 different options with it. And so the demonstration is about a palletizing job. It's got 3 employees per shift, 3 shifts per day, so 9 employees total working in the area, high rate of injury, and also a kind of a bottleneck for the facility, right? Production moves along, but it can only move along fast enough as they can stack the product and get it out the door. So let me escape out of this. And the calculator has disappeared. I will find it. Okay, how do I get that up there?
I think you'll need to duplicate the display. Just one second.
Yeah, a little bit of technical difficulty. We have help coming. Good.
Can you duplicate the display?
Thank you so much. Okay, so this is the calculator. Very simply, anywhere where you see a box or a drop down, that's where you can input things. So 9 employees, their average salary per hour, I probably should raise that. We keep raising our minimum wage, fortunately. And then you're looking at 3 years worth of claims in our system, because that's how they actually set our rates, is based on a 3-year history. And the way it works is you just select what type of injury happened. So let's say, this past year there were 2 back strains and also a rotator cuff injury, so bad year. The number of claims, and it automatically drops in the typical costs, and these are in US dollars, obviously. And then this number is the estimated indirect costs as that ratio compared to the direct costs. And in a lot of cases, the indirect costs will be more than the direct costs. You can see all the background, the guts of the calculator. I left them showing. The goal was for anybody who knows Excel to be able to take this and just mess with it. And happy to see that that's happened in a few cases where people have gone out and improved upon it. Inputting solutions is the next tab, and there are basically the three options that you could put in. So I chose job rotation, and then pallet lifts that would raise the pallets up to get rid of the bending, and then vacuum lifts that would come in and lift each box off the conveyor and lower it to the pallet. So basically 3 different levels of effectiveness. So job rotation reduces the time of exposure, pallet lifts reduce the level of exposure, and vacuum lifts I put down as eliminating exposure to the hazardous part of the job. And all you do is basically click on the little radio buttons to do that. Oops. And then in terms of productivity improvements, didn't really expect any productivity gains from job rotation. Sometimes you actually see a decrease because you're taking the experienced people and moving them out of there and bringing in the new folks. And so you might actually see a temporary productivity decrease there. I thought the pallet lifts, which you can see here, would reduce that wasted motion of bending down. Some of them have a turntable as well, so you don't have to walk around the pallet. And then this is the vacuum lift. And I thought, if it made it really easy to grab a box and put it on the pallet, that it would actually speed up the whole process. Some of them can be designed so that you can pick up 2 boxes at a time. And so that would help to overcome any slowing down that happens from using a piece of equipment. And then everything from here is just automatically calculated. So you see the estimated benefits, and let me make this a little bit bigger. So the reduction in claims is based on that effectiveness number I showed you before. And that translates into a reduction in workers' compensation costs based on that average cost of claims that was calculated, as well as the reduction in indirect costs. And then the productivity benefits are really just a formula based on how many workers there are and what you're paying them per hour and what financially that would work out to with a small increase in productivity. Basically, you're getting more productive work out of what you're paying those workers. So it's really like a reduction in loss rather than a gain. And so you can see how that plays out. And you're looking at, okay, what's the savings in the first year, and then over 3 years, and then over 5 years, assuming you don't have too many additional inputs. And then with the payback, you can see it just lays out all the costs, tells you what the payback period is. So payback for job rotation, very, very quick because there's not much cost to inputting it. But then over the 5 years, a fairly significant savings. But as you get into the more effective solutions, might take a little longer to pay itself off, but you get greater benefits over the 5-year period. And there's these very simple little graphs that come up. And so that very quickly is the calculator. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Ontario's looks like. My plan is to update this calculator and also hopefully develop it as something that's web-based for people to access as well. I'm also working with another ergonomist on one that's more of a risk-based model, so you don't need those injuries to occur in order to justify an intervention. We're looking first at lifting jobs because that's number 1 cause of workplace injuries where we are at least, and trying to figure out how you could use something like the NIOSH lifting equation to develop a risk of injury over a certain period and monetize that somehow. So with that, I think we'll go back to Q&A. So does anybody have any questions? Thank you.
I'm not sure this is a question, maybe it's an observation, and then maybe a comment on it, which is reduction, or how do you calculate improved production? If I have my worker there for the entire year and not off for a month, is a calculator, will the future calculator include the productivity gains from that?
Okay, yeah, and we were having some conversations about absenteeism and work absences last night. I think a lot of the gains in productivity that came from those case studies were related to, in a lot of cases, the fact that workers weren't having to miss quite so much work. In countries where they don't have the workers' compensation mess that we have in the United States, a lot of times they are looking at work absences as one of the main indicators of the success of an intervention or the size of the problem without it. And so I think a lot of that, the productivity is already baked into the numbers that I used. But I do know that in other jurisdictions, that's a more important consideration. Some of the things that I didn't include in the model also I think are important, things like quality of the work being done. There's been a lot more research on that lately. I know in healthcare, turnover has been a huge issue, like being able to keep the employees that you have. I think, one way that people could go is, depending on what's important in their industry, they could develop a similar model that focuses on the things that are important there. And if, work absences is a critical issue, I'm sure there are formulas that Human Resources Department have for, how to figure out what that is costing the organization. So thank you for your question. Any others?
Well, thank you very much. And I knew about your calculator for a while, and I'm so happy to see the productivity section added. That's really, really interesting and important, because it's hard to try to convince somebody on future injuries, because they always say, well, we don't have any. So anyway, so it's very interesting. My question is about the solutions that you propose. Do you plan to have more type of solution? Because what I notice is sometimes it's impossible to implement those because there's no room, or the system doesn't allow using those. But like, for example, exoskeleton as a solution.
So other types of solutions?
Yeah, for lifting.
Yeah, there was quite a variety in the case studies, and if you go to the website where it's located, I actually have all 250 of them in an Excel spreadsheet. Okay. Obviously, the most relevant example is the one that's closest to what you want to implement. So even if there's only like one or two people who have experienced that, you can take a look at their numbers and use that to estimate your own effectiveness. So okay. Does that make sense?
So where would the exoskeleton fall?
So yeah, a lot of this was done before exoskeletons. Okay. So, but I have been looking into those as well. I think it's a little early to talk cost benefit on those. I know like Boeing has been using them, Ford, a lot of the bigger manufacturers. I'm waiting for them to work all the kinks out of it before we start trying to recommend them to smaller employers. So that information will come in terms of the cost benefit of exoskeletons if it's out there, but it's still a little early.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Good morning.
Hi, I'm John Mullen, Unifor. I'm a health and safety rep at the Oakville Assembly Complex. My question is, could this be used as an RA, and where exactly do you get your data in the calculator? Is it just science, or are there any RSI cases that are used as well?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow the question.
So your calculator, first of all, where's the data to make this an effective and an accurate tool? Do you take just from the science, or do you do it from previous cases? History?
Yeah, and so it is based on those previous cases, and it's a model, right? It's just something that's out there. My hope was that people were going to take it, use it, publish what they found, follow up on it, and make sure that the numbers were accurate. And the time it's been out, nobody's come back to me and said, hey, your numbers are way off. But the tendency is we use it to get what we want, I think, to justify it. And once it's implemented, I think people are a little afraid to go back and follow up and find out, like maybe it didn't pay off as well as it did. So it's still, the science of the outcome, I don't think is really there yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Dr. Nancy Black from University of Moncton, where I teach in engineering. And I'm just wondering to what extent you're aware of, you shared some of the uptake. I think this is a really neat thing for the engineering students in an early on level. And I'm wondering to what extent you're aware of the educational uptake of this kind of thing, because as you point out, anyone can use it. Any idea, and is that something that has been or will be looked at as well?
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to humble brag a little more. I have seen it being picked up by some universities as one of the things that they teach in their ergonomics courses. And just so you know, I came out of the program that Hal Hendrick designed. And so that's, I do feel like any university program that covers ergonomics should be touching on the return on investment aspect of it, because I think it really helps the profession as a whole. So I know at University of California, Berkeley, they have it there. I actually saw it published in a textbook in Sweden. They contacted me about it as well. I'm not sure if University of Waterloo is using it, or at least a derivation of it. So I have been seeing some uptake in university teaching as well, and that's been really nice to see. Again, I keep hoping people are going to do a better job, that they're going to improve on the model. It makes me a little nervous that I just put this thing together over the course of one summer, basically, and all of a sudden people are just taking it like on faith. So hopefully it won't come back to prove to be completely off base.
Quick. Hi, I'm Olmestic, Unifor. I'm also wondering how manipulatable. So can people change the inputs and change the programs and the calculations on your program? In other words, can they get inside and change a formula somewhere?
Absolutely.
So that's the point of it. You actually want people to take it and to manipulate it to their benefit.
That's right. Yeah, that's why I did it in Excel. I didn't lock it down or password protect it. You can go in and change any of those numbers. If your injury numbers are different, you can put those in. If you don't like the estimates for effectiveness or increases in productivity, you can change that in the formula.
Really quick, Jack, I can see you want the space. Rachel from Ergo Inc. I apologize if I missed this, but who's working on an Ontario calculator?
I will announce that in a minute.
Okay, fantastic.
Good timing.
Thank you. Jack Callahan, University of Waterloo. So, in your experience, I'm sure you've talked to lots of ergos out there and companies. What is the response from management to this tool? Like, are they buying into it? And second, do you have any horror stories where somebody predicted this was going to be a return on investment in a year, and it ended up costing money? How well does it work, I guess, I'm asking, and what's the buy-in from companies?
Okay. And I don't have a lot of examples, but every once in a while, because it is in Excel, I'll get contacted by somebody, in a company or an organization all over the United States typically, saying the Excel stopped working and they want help with it. So I know people are using it, and a lot of them will say, hey, I've been using it for years. And they haven't said, you know, it didn't work. So I have to go with the assumption that everything is okay, because I actually kind of want those horror stories, right? I want to hear like, hey, this didn't work, and dive into that and figure out what needs to be adjusted in it so that it is accurate. But so far, that hasn't come up. And again, I think it's that they kind of don't want to know, right? My experience has been, like from back when I worked in aerospace, most managers, like area managers, really just want that excuse to implement ergonomics. And they need to go to their leadership, who aren't directly dealing with their workers, with the financial side of it. And you know, it's a nice experience as an ergonomist, because I get to talk about the financial side of it, the cost benefit, and then management gets to say, but the important thing is we're taking care of our workers, right? So we kind of flip that dynamic, and that tends to work out really well. And so from what I've seen of management, they're just really happy to have that financial backing, so then they can do, you know, the right thing without, you know, getting shot down.
My name's Haley Lapierre. I'm from Options Incorporated. Just a quick question about your indirect versus direct. I just want to know what kind of ratio you use between those.
I'm sorry, a little louder, please.
I'm just looking to see what type of ratio you use between direct and indirect costs.
Okay, so I will just reference the model it came from, and you can look that up, because I don't remember the numbers exactly.
Oh, okay.
So OSHA has a safety pays calculator on their website. That's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the U.S. And I'm pretty sure it's still up. And they based their indirect costs on a study that was done actually in the construction sector, on what the different ratios were depending on the cost range of a particular claim. And if I remember correctly, it ranges from somewhere around 1.1 indirect to direct to, I think around 2 was the highest direct to indirect. But again, I don't have the numbers memorized. They are baked into the calculator, and you can kind of see them there as well in the you know, the background of it. And it's also in the instructions for the calculator. I'm pretty sure I published that list as well, so you can find all that. All right, well, thank you all very much. That's been a pleasure.